and welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun Chow. North Korea released photos of a small nuclear warhead that could be topped on various weapons. Pyongyang also conducted a series of missile launches from sea, land, and air. Today, we have former intelligence officials to assess the North Korean threat and lay out the way forward.
These provocative actions being taken by the DPRK are destabilizing, they are unsafe, and they put the broader region at risk.
북한의 무모한 도발은 반드시 대가를 치르도록 할 것입니다.
In the studio with me, Ms. Beth Sanner, Senior Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center. Ms. Sanner was the Deputy Director of National Intelligence for Mission Integration from April 2019 to March 2021. In this role, she also served as the President's intelligence briefer. Previous to this assignment, Ms. Sanner was the Vice Chair of the National Intelligence Council. Ms. Sanner is currently a contributor to CNN. Also joining us, Mr. Markus Garlauskas, Director of Indo-Pacific Security Initiative at the Atlantic Council. Mr. Garlauskas was the National Intelligence Officer for North Korea on the National Intelligence Council until June of 2020. As NIO, Mr. Garlauskas led the U.S. intelligence community's strategic analysis on North Korea. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having us.
Now, Mr. Garlauskas, North Korea unveiled a series of weapons and capabilities, including technical nuclear warhead Hwasan-31, underwater nuclear-capable attack drone, and capability to airburst warheads. Now, there are speculations whether North Korea is just exaggerating. What is your take? Do you think the North Korea forward deployed these weapons, and does North Korea have credible capability?
So first of all, I think it is important to keep in mind that North Korea engages in systematic denial and deception regarding the true state of its capabilities. But that doesn't mean that we should underestimate the progress that North Korea has made. They are continuing to move forward, not just developing systems that are experimental, but they're also moving toward operational capabilities. And you see the pattern in their activities isn't just experimenting with new systems, but it's actually developing the capability to employ them in combat situations. And so I think we should take these evolving capabilities very seriously and be prepared for these capabilities to be fielded, even if we can't be sure exactly where they are at any given day.
Now, Ms. Sanner, you are Deputy Director of National Intelligence, and how does the United States collect intelligence when North Korea unveils its new weapons? And does the U.S. fully understand the new weapons going beyond what's publicly available?
Well, I hope your viewers understand that I cannot actually reveal secrets about what we know about North Korea, because the only people who would benefit from that would be the North Korean regime. So I think we would all be agreed that wouldn't be a good idea. But I guess I can peel back the curtain a little bit and talk about how, analysts take a look at this kind of information in what we call all-source intelligence analysis. So we look at all these different kinds of secrets coming in, whether it's from satellite imagery, intercepted communications, from human sources, and then from open source, just like open source analysts do. But then we also have all of these experts that are technical and go the whole gamut of kind of disciplines, and they team together and they produce insight by taking what is known by the open world, but also this layer of secrets and this layer of expertise. And so I think that's really what's different about it.
Wouldn't the United States, showing that it knows so much about North Korean capabilities, wouldn't it instill fear on the North Korean side and make them refrain from those provocations?
So I personally, and I'll let Markus comment on this as well, I think that North Korea is driven not so much by an effort to make provocations. I think that, as Markus just described, much of what they're doing is really designed to advance their program. And so I really don't think that by us exposing secrets would at all change their mentality about what they're trying to do. And in some ways, I think that them doing the kinds of aggressive actions that they're taking to improve their program, but also in some signaling, I don't think that there's really any reason for them to stop that, because it's kind of essential to all sorts of needs and goals that the North Korean regime has. Mm-hmm. You want to add to that, Markus?
I think it's also very important, you'd agree, Beth, to protect the sources and methods that we use to gather intelligence, and not give away anything that would allow North Korea to better conceal the progress that they've made, to better conceal their activities, and to deny us the ability to warn of impending North Korean activities. So I do think holding back a lot on what we know and how we know it is very important to being able to maintain operational and strategic advantage over North Korea.
And Ms. Sanner, you were at that position to make strategic decisions and advise to the policymakers. So given where the path that North Korea is on, where is this situation headed to? Should we expect some kind of a serious conflict, serious clash between South and North Korea coming out from miscalculation, just like what happened in 2010 when North Korea attacked South Korean Navy ship and South Korean island?
Well, I do think that we're in a different place than we were in 2010. Although those are important historical markers, I think that the risk of miscalculation now is actually higher, for multiple reasons. Right now, I mean, we have North Korea just doing a lot of activities and all of the testing activities. We also have a whole new expanded relationship between South Korea, Japan, and the U.S. And you can also throw the Philippines in there a little bit too, but there's a lot going on in their world that they see as threatening. And our communications aren't very good between the North and the rest of the alliance. Mm-hmm. So, there is quite a range there for the kinds of miscalculations, and I just think that the types of weapon systems now that North Korea has, and some of the rules that they've put in place about when they would use weapons in terms of preemptive strikes, and South Korea also talking about different rules of engagement, that raises the level and the risk, I think, of miscalculation in this environment. I would hate to set a time frame on it. I think we're already there in terms of we're in a risky environment there, and I personally see that risk only growing.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, I think reinforcing deterrence in the waters off the west coast of Korea, particularly in the Northwest Islands area and the Northern Lemon Line, is very important. Both of those examples that you cited happened in that area. Mm-hmm. And given how close China is, you could easily see the North Koreans making a mistake in believing that the U.S. and South Korea will restrain the reaction because we're concerned about antagonizing China. And you could also see with these new capabilities that North Korea continues to develop that they may think they can achieve a localized advantage. And I think it's very important to disabuse the North Koreans, disabuse Kim Jongun of the idea that he can achieve an advantage out there in the years ahead.
Now, I don't usually ask about North Korean intentions, but since you were intelligence officers and you are trained to analyze behaviors, so I want to ask Ms. Sanner, do you think Kim Jong-un is the kind of a leader that would use nuclear weapons and not just retain them as a deterrence?
Well, one of the things that I really hammered home to all the analysts who worked for me is this idea of context. That decisions are always made in a certain context, and that context changes. So when you ask that question, would Kim Jong-un use nuclear weapons? It depends on the context. If the context is that he believes his regime is under threat, absolutely. That's why he has those weapons. And I mean, he's developing weapons that are beyond the need just for deterrence. And as Markus likes to say, Kim Jong-un uses his nuclear weapons every day as a coercive device. So, yes, but context matters.
I think there's a range of realistic scenarios under which Kim Jong-un could have the mistaken belief that using a nuclear weapon, particularly one of these more tactical systems that you were referring to earlier, that he could advance his goals through doing that as opposed to ensuring his regime's destruction. I think it's very important, again, to deter Kim Jong-un from believing that a tactical nuclear use would be something that the regime could survive. Given, again, the advancements and capabilities, the changing context, I think particularly in an ongoing conflict, you could see the potential for Kim Jong-un to make the mistake, because ultimately he is not concerned about the lives of the North Korean people. He's not concerned about the potential death, destruction, and casualties. He's concerned about the survival of his regime remaining in power and his own personal survival. And so if nuclear weapons use is what he thinks is going to take to secure that, I don't think he would pull back from doing so. But we need to give him pause in that regard.
And Ms. Sanner, there's much debate about whether North Korea has the capability to deliver the ICBM re-entry vehicle to ICBM range on an operational trajectory. Of course, the intelligence must have some insights on this, but what is your take?
Well, I think we need to be prepared for the idea that they can do that. We will only know when they actually do an operational test. And, at that point, it's kind of, okay, now what? I personally, I think Markus can talk a little bit more about that, but, I personally think that there's a little bit, maybe too much emphasis on this idea of having to see an operational test or worrying about whether that reentry vehicle will work perfectly. And I think that maybe that doesn't matter, because if North Korea can put an ICBM over the continental United States, that in and of itself, whether it works perfectly or not, is extremely difficult, and it would change the lives of millions of people.
Right. So ICBMs, I think you would view them primarily as what they call a counter-value weapon. So you're talking about very large area targets, populated areas. The effort to put at risk, population centers, and with this thermonuclear warhead the North Koreans have talked about. So we're talking about a very large radius of destruction, very different than these tactical short-range systems that we were talking about earlier.
President Trump said, "We know every inch of North Korea." Mr. Garlauskas, how much has North Korea expanded its nuclear facility? Director General of IAEA said that North Korea's nuclear program is spawning geographically. It's not only about Yongbyon anymore.
So I love that quote. I was there in Hanoi, of course, when he said it. And that was in the context of emphasizing that what Kim Jong-un was putting on the table at Hanoi was insufficient. And I think in that context, it really makes a lot of sense. The Yongbyon complex, of course, is a significant part of North Korea's nuclear program, their history. There's been fissile material production there. The North Koreans even allowed inspections of Yongbyon. But the focus on Yongbyon, I think, distracts from the fact that this is a part of a much larger weapons of mass destruction enterprise in North Korea that, of course, includes more than the nuclear program. It includes the delivery systems that we were talking about earlier as well. So I think, though Yongbyon is important and significant, and it's a large facility, that it's only one piece of a much larger puzzle that you would really have to address if you're going to denuclearize North Korea.
Does that mean U.S. is very familiar with that larger enterprise, and was President Trump also very aware of that enterprise?
So, of course, I can't go into specifics, but I will say he was very thoroughly prepared prior to the Hanoi summit. I'm very proud of the work that the U.S. government and particularly the U.S. intelligence community did to make sure that he was well armed with the best possible information about the full state and extent of North Korea's capabilities and programs.
And Ms. Sanner, you were intelligence briefer to President Trump for more than 2 years. And President Trump actually was very confident about denuclearizing North Korea before going into summit with Kim Jong-un. Do you think his confidence came from intelligence, or it has nothing to do with intelligence?
I really don't know. I mean, I can't get in President Trump's head, and I wasn't his briefer at that time. But if you read The Art of the Deal, you know a lot about kind of how President Trump thinks about negotiations. And so for him to offer an economic lifeline, the promise of an economic better future for North Korea, I think he thought that was a very compelling argument. And, but I also think that President Trump had the confidence probably given to him from the intelligence community in Hanoi to say, this isn't going to work. Kim is not ready to negotiate to meet U.S. standards. So at that point, I think it was very important that he understood what was on the table and it wasn't sufficient.
So, Mr. Garlauskas, in the run-up to the Singapore summit, when South Korea's National Security Advisor Chung Eui-yong visited the White House and said that Kim Jongun will denuclearize, was it the same judgment by the U.S. side as well at the time that North Korea will denuclearize?
So I can't speak to the judgments of everyone involved, but I would say there's always been a great deal of skepticism, certainly for a long time anyway, on the potential for Kim Jong-un to make the decision to give up his nuclear weapons. And I think you've seen some consistent public statements from the U.S. intelligence community during the annual testimony before the United States Congress that indicates the IC's, the intelligence community's view on that. But I do think it's also important to keep in mind that when you're talking about assessments, you're talking about possibilities and probabilities and not certainties. And so I second Beth's point that the interest in exploring the potential for Kim Jong-un to actually denuclearize was not a wrong-headed idea, but it's important to not let oneself be trapped intellectually by the idea of exploring a possibility means that you're certain that possibility is going to succeed.
Mm-hmm. And Ms. Sanner, given your background, you must be fully aware of North Korean nuclear and missile capabilities. Based on that, do you think North Korea will truly negotiate away its nuclear weapons?
No. I don't. It's a very simple answer. I guess just in this context, you can play out different scenarios, but as long as Kim is in power, I don't think that he will negotiate away his nuclear weapons because they are essential to him staying in his regime, both in terms of the external threat, but also the internal threat. They are really essential for buttressing his control over the population and justifying the policies that he has in place there, the absolute control he has over the population there. So it is hard for me to imagine that in the current state of affairs that he would do that.
The stated goal of the U.S. government is the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and is open to meet with North Korea anytime, anywhere, without conditions. What is the goal of the latest stated purpose if you believe North Korea will not denuclearize?
I think the implication of what your question is, I think that we actually need a policy change. And I'll ask Markus to speak more about this because he's written about this. But I don't think a policy that's based on denuclearization is actually an achievable policy. And so I think that we need to think a little bit more about how we approach this question, whether we change our declaration or we work around a public statement and we're actually trying to achieve something different. But I do think that the reality has moved past the policy.
Just one more follow-up for you. There are many people who want to go for the risk reduction, the arms control discussions. Are you for that idea then?
I'm absolutely for that idea. I think the question is, how can that be achieved? And right now, I think we have a bit of a conundrum because we're in a situation where the North won't even talk to us and where we've lost complete support by China and Russia to hold North Korea to account and to force them to any kind of negotiating table.
Do you believe arms control is the only realistic option for U.S. at this point, Mr. Garlauskas?
So I think we have a great number of realistic options, and there's different approaches that we could take. But this larger question of the goal to be denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, I think long term, that is the right goal. Mm-hmm. But I think the challenge and the problem is that, as Beth pointed out, is that Kim Jong-un himself, though probably is not going to be sincerely agreeing to do that and then to follow through. And so we need to be thinking long-term about a North Korean leadership after Kim Jongun, a North Korean leadership that is more responsive to the needs of its people, more willing to be a responsible actor, and not in the mindset of Kim Jong-un that would potentially be willing to denuclearize. And so I think the idea of indefinitely accepting that North Korea will remain nuclear until the end of human history, I think that's a very bad idea. But alternatively, on the other end of the spectrum, focusing on negotiations for denuclearization as though there's going to be some kind of dramatic breakthrough in the next few months or few years, I think that's also a mistake. And I think, to be fair, many people who talk about denuclearization being the goal don't necessarily mean it should be the overriding immediate priority, but then I think it gets misinterpreted and it gets filtered, and then there's always these hopes about perhaps we can make this breakthrough, and so let's hold back from doing this other thing, or let's not conduct this military exercise because it might upset North Korea. Let's not push this information in North Korea because it might prevent them from coming to the table. And so I think in the near term there has to be a focus on deterrence, and in the long term, though, on shaping the conditions where there can be a fundamental change in the relationship between the leadership of North Korea and its people to make North Korean denuclearization possible.
Aside from the denuclearization goal, in 2017, the maximum pressure and the fire and fury rhetoric prompted China and Russia to agree to 4 different UN Security Council resolutions on North Korea. Do you think that maximum pressure strategy is worth revisiting at this point?
Well, I think it's reliant on support from China and Russia, and that was kind of the beauty of those negotiations in 2017 and the UN Security Council resolutions that came out of it. But in May of this year, I think we really had the big reveal of why this strategy is not working. In May of last year, China and Russia vetoed a U.S. resolution to hold North Korea account for breaking resolutions that China and Russia had signed on to. So we had a situation where China and Russia weren't even upholding their own previous commitments to hold North Korea accountable. We are in a completely different geopolitical world, accentuated and accelerated by the war in Ukraine. And so I really don't think that at this stage we can count at all on China and Russia doing anything. And the White House just yesterday said that Russia was soon going to be sending a delegation to North Korea to negotiate a weapons for food deal. Mm-hmm. And so that's the situation that we're in. And unfortunately, it really constrains the kind of multilateral approach, the UN approach that had been, relatively effective before.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Garlauskas, another new development last year is that North Korea firing missiles when U.S. and ROK alliance are doing drills. This is a new development that shows North Korea is not afraid. Do you think U.S. showing more determination to strike North Korea would have North Korea think twice about its provocations?
So first of all, even though this is a recent development, it's actually not the first time that North Korea has fired missiles and conducted such activities during military exercises. I recall this actually happening while I was stationed in Korea. And so I think the idea, though, that this indicates that North Korea is not afraid, I think that's not the right way to look at it. I think the North Korean continued progress in both testing new systems and then conducting launches that they claim are operational training. I think that indicates North Korea's determination, Kim Jong-un's determination, to continue advancing his nuclear and missile programs. And to some degree, though, I think it is based a little bit on fear that North Korea is going to be at a military disadvantage if there is a confrontation or conflict between North Korea and the ROK-U.S. alliance. And so I don't think it's a lack of fear that's driving some of this activity. I think to some extent it is showing that North Korea is afraid of the progress that's being made and wants to change the balance of capability on the peninsula.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Mr. Garlauskas, Ms. Sanner, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. We'll be back here next week with U.S. experts to discuss the two Koreas and the region right here from Washington.